In terms of your extensive perspective, looking at the topic area of this particular session on the power of the power of literature and culture for peace. What do you think of the relationship in the subject areas that you are familiar with in the coming together of image and text in terms of one another and in terms of the reader for purposes of dissemination?
So, a good afternoon to everyone here, and a big thank you for Manjari for inviting all of us and putting this lovely panel here together, very well balanced gender wise too. I'm delighted to be here and very, very happy that we are a diverse group, because that is what India is all about, the cultural diversity and plurality. Coming to your question, when we look at traditional arts in India, in particular, I'm not talking of contemporary, I'm going to stick to traditional arts for the moment. There is an absolute symbiotic relationship between image and text. Because if we go back to the Natya Shastra itself, which is a text on dramaturgy, but it lays down the foundations for the appreciation and the understanding of Indian arts through the rasa theory which emerged within the Natya Shastra itself. And what does it basically show? And for that, I'll go back to this very interesting incident of in the Chitrasut of the Markandeya Puran, where Markandeya talks to the Rishi and he asks him, "Oh master, teach me the art of drawing." To which he asks, "Do you know the art of dance?" He says, "No, I don't know the art of dance." To which he says, "Then teach me the art of dance." To which he says, "But do you know the art of sculpture?" He says, "No, I don't know the art of sculpture." "Oh master, teach me the art of sculpture." To which he then goes on to say, the dialogue continues, but it goes on to say that, "Do you know the art of music?" He says, "No, I don't." Then he says, "Go back to music, because music is the most abstract of all arts." Why I gave this example from the Puranic story was because in India there is a great interdependence on the arts. And when you look at any painting, sculpture, whether you're looking at the Ganga Avartan in the sculptures of Mahabalipuram, or you're looking at the illustrations of the Ramayana in the courts of Akbar, in his atelier, what do you see? You see a complete relationship between the writer, the poet, and the painted image or the sculpted image. So, in the days of yore, in the traditional period, the artist would go into deep contemplation. They would actually be very reclusive. They would read the text, ingest the text, and then think about it, contemplate before they create it. So I think there is an absolute, very, very strong relationship between image and text. So if you did not understand the text, how would you create? Then you'd be a mere illustrator. So how does the artistic interpretation come? What makes a work of art is something which moves you. And you cannot, today people are talking of immersive experiences. You go anywhere, you go to the National Gallery in London and you see an immersive experience. You're going outside the station, you see an immersive experience. So where does the immersive experience come from? Till you don't immerse yourself in the work. So therefore, within the Indian art practice, particularly of culture and even performing arts, the immersive experience comes because the old dancer was also a poet and a singer. They did operatic works. It is only in the period of modernity that silos started being created. A sculptor would not be a painter, painter would not be a photographer. But today everybody is an artist. When you say you're an artist, you can do anything. So for me, the relationship between image and text is absolutely invaluable.
Thank you. She has almost picked out the next question for you. Sohini ji, in terms of Markandeya Puran, Natya Shastra, the question by itself gets framed only for you. Your various initiatives in Indian stage stories, creating and delineating the entire story in terms of the Natya Shastra and to connect civilizations, whereby you have been able to successfully bring together stage performing artists from different countries, and you have been teaching them to further inform you. Sohini has been also a visiting professor in 17 universities, including Europe, South America, Russia, and the UK, where she has been teaching Natya Shastra, she's been teaching performing arts in this particular area. Where do you see the power of this, performing the image and curating or creating the entire story to work towards peace?
Thank you very much. It's a very relevant, pertinent question that I'm looking forward to answer. Thank you all of you, PILF and Manjari for having me here. Thank you Alka for speaking so beautifully and setting the tone. And I'm very happy to be here with you today. So two of my books, one is called Indian Stage Stories and the second is called The Dance of Kali. The first one is a coffee table book called Dancing with the Gods, where I have spoken about dance, Markandeya Puranas, Shaktism, and stories from our Puranas, certain tenets of our Vedas, but the main core message is that the world is one. And I have explored that through life, on stage, behind stage, because I feel the power of peace, the power of literature, power of arts contributing to world peace lies in empathy. And that empathy can be created only when somebody can relate to what you're doing. So I have performed Bharatnatyam with Tchaikovsky in Russia, with Mozart in Austria. And besides that, when we are speaking about Shaktism, when we are speaking about our mother goddesses, Ma Durga or the power of Kali, at the same time we speak of Ishtar in Mesopotamia, who was the mother goddess, warrior and goddess. We speak about Sarala Kali in the north of Spain, south of France, who is dark in color and who is worshipped. Some pagan rituals which have been accepted into structured Christianity later, but ritualized and then immersed in water after 4 days. And when we study anthropology, the current Irishmen have their roots in Iran. So for me, arts is a reflection of life, which is a fusion, which is we are all one. When we realize that our souls connect, when that empathy happens, then we relate to each other through our arts. We do not look at the colored Americans and think they are a strange species. If we study their history, if we know what they are all about, if we especially know their culture. Similarly, when the West studies the doctrines of Ma Kali, we will not have something as weird and offensive like a model Heidi Klum dressing up as Kali and saying, oh, this is my favorite demon and this is how I dress up for Halloween. You just study a little bit, empathy grows and respect grows, and that can definitely bridge the world because our art and heart is connected at every level. We just need to realize it and work towards that empathy. Thank you.
Empathy. So that makes me have to cross over to Jennifer. Otherwise, I would have gone by the sequence. Because in terms of empathy in post-1947 Europe and the Marshall Plan for the world, for the mind, and the many sides of the World War II conflict that you are familiar with, which required efforts at peace building, but it required empathy first. And you are also closely involved in the Asia Peace Innovators Forum. How can we step out, we as readers, step out of our preconceived notions? Because before we pick up that book, we have a notion that we are bought into of what we should be or should not be doing. Especially, can the power of culture and literature bridge those divides?
That's a beautiful question that's going to definitely help me share what I wanted to share. So yes, also thank you for having me here. I'm very honoured to be sitting on this panel. But unlike my fellow panelists, I have not authored something, and so I'm feeling particularly lucky to be here and sitting with them all. So yes, I work at an organisation called Salzburg Global Seminar, and we were founded, as Bharat mentioned, in 1947 to be a Marshall Plan for the mind. For those of you who are perhaps too young or to have studied in history, the Marshall Plan was to rebuild Europe after the Second World War. It was a lot of money that was brought from the US to rebuild the infrastructure of Europe to ensure that what happened after the First World War did not happen again. And so the founders of the organisation I work for thought, okay, this is fine, we need to rebuild roads, we need to rebuild bridges, but what we actually also need to do is to rebuild the human connection between the people across Europe. And there were multiple different sides of the war. It was not so black and white as to have been two-sided. There were many people who suffered. And so the founders of our organisation brought those people together at our home, which is Schloss Leopoldskron in Salzburg, Austria. And the first meeting of Salzburg Global Seminar was 100 young people from across Europe. Margaret Mead, the social anthropologist, was the first chair, and they discussed American literature. So people who were communists, people who had been SS officers, people who had been interred as Jews in concentration camps were all brought together to talk about American literature. And the whole premise of this was that essentially by discussing something which transcended their troubles, that they would find some common ground to be able to start rebuilding the emotional and the cultural fabric of Europe. And so the first seminar was a success, I should say. I'm sure not all of those people wanted to talk to each other, but they were able to build connections. And it's on that vein that we've continued working for 76 years. And I now work on a program called the Asia Peace Innovators Forum, bringing peace builders together from across Europe, from different geographies and from different backgrounds, to help them to do the same in their own contexts. And so that is to say, essentially, we continue to work in this vein of bringing people together to find a common purpose. And I think that is something which sits very much at the heart of peace building, and that is to find empathy and to find a human core that allows you to move beyond your differences. And I think cultural experiences, literature, can be an absolutely fantastic vessel and a fantastic vehicle for doing this. In terms of how we convene and how I personally set up those situations, I think many of the problems that we have in the world, not just a lack of peace and conflict, but conflict, forms of non-violent conflict as well as violent conflict, stem from not enough time and energy being put into building relationships with one another. Not enough time and energy and value placed upon empathy, placed upon relationships. We are taught and driven so much to focus on other outcomes that the human connection is frequently lost. And so when we convene, a huge amount of our effort goes into creating that common bond with humans in the room, so 40 to 60 people, and finding what it is that unites those people. What is the common vision that they have for their world, for their children, for how they want to look after their parents, for how they look after their cat, whatever it is that you can find that brings those people together and to build from there. And we often face resistance in doing this because everyone wants to get to the work, they want to quickly be doing something, but we say no, the real work is building relationships with people. And when I convene the Asia Peace Innovators Forum, I've learned of some fantastic additional examples of how culture can be used also to do this. And I think culture, as you know, the examples that have already been shared by Alka and Sohini, is a great experience or part of our world where you are taking the time to be intentional and you're taking the time out from whatever the potentially hectic or money-making parts of your life may be, to really focus on being a human culture is so much of what makes us human. And so I think there are many ways in which culture can bring us together if it is done with this intentionality of doing so. And so some of the examples I have are of people doing playback theatre in Nepal, where theatre is used as a way to resolve conflict and in fact to move on to healing within communities that have had intercommunal violence. Or of course creating spaces of memory across Europe to remember victims of the Holocaust, for example, where there are spaces where people can come together and share memory through art. So those are just a few of the examples, but I suppose I should finish by saying I think being intentional about relationships and being intentional about how you use culture are how we should go forward in using these things. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. You are making my task much easier because the sequence seems to go in that way from empathy.
Everything seems to connect.
Yeah, and everything seems to be connected from empathy to 1947 post-Marshall, post-1947 the Marshall Plan. The reason I mention that is because we as in India we are familiar with 1947 very clearly and the end of the Second World War. But immediately after that, 1948, and Toma is from Israel, and coming in from Israel, which is now in global context, question is certainly about peace and not about war. But 1948 brings up a very strange situation where entire villages were moved out, and they were moved out to Lebanon. An entire village was looked at as a source. Your first book mentions that, where the stone of that village, the houses, was taken out. And you will be surprised, Dr. Alkaji, the entire stone of that particular village, of Jewish, of Arabic residents for centuries, that stone was removed to create a museum at a different place. How do you picturize that, and how did you bring it out as a book in Hebrew and Arabic? And did that create connect? And did that give some sort of a recognition to people, awareness of what is happening at that particular time? Because that would have been a very rapidly changing moment in 1948, post-1948.
Thank you for your question, and thank you for the invitation. It's there's much to wrap up inside of such a thing. I do want to say that politically, I'm sort of a child of the collapse of the efforts to people just meet each other and realize that we are all human, and in this way we will reach peace. That was something that was very common and done a lot in Israel in the 90s, where the Oslo process was sort of going on, and there were many initiatives to have Palestinian people and Jewish people meet together and sort of realize that we are all human beings and so on. And of course, people realize that they're human beings, and in fact, they also knew that before. But what happened after such a context, such a meeting, where everybody realized that everybody is a human being, everybody goes home, and there's an unequal power structure inside the room where people meet to understand that it's just human beings. And in the end of such a meeting, Palestinian kids, for example, they go back to the refugee camp, and the Israeli children go to their safe houses in the cities, and so the realization that we're just human is a very thin one that did not really have political consequences. The book that you were referring to, I was born in Israel, in Israel, in the north of the country, and 1948 was in a bit the same way that they did in India. The British decided to split the country in two, and half to the Jews and half to the Palestinians. It worked over there just as good as it did here. But in that war, there was some expulsion of great numbers of Palestinian people and villages out of what has become the new state of Israel. And in the place that I was born, in the north of the country, there's like a big museum period of like very beautiful white, big white stones, and eventually it's like at some point of my, I was thinking my middle 20s or maybe even later, I heard a rumor that this museum for history and of the area, that this history museum is built from stones taken from a depopulated Palestinian village that was like a couple of kilometers away from that. And this rumor really surprised me because I knew the history museum from inside, and I knew the history museum from inside does not tell anything about the history, about the Palestinian history of the area. And so I went into a quest trying to find out, first of all, if this rumor is true, because I grew up in that place and I never heard it before. And then after I heard that it is true, to try to write a book and through writing, through literature, through thought, through archival work and memory work, to try to understand how this happens, that a village, a Palestinian village, turns into a Israeli history museum, where the museum itself keeps quiet about the mere building material from which it is made. I cannot say that the book contributed to a global peace or to local peace, but it was my way to not to build bridges, rather, but for like a critical self-inspection of my own role in the history that I was thrown into.
Thank you. We'll get back to that particular area. But in order to look at a confluence, I would like to look at a question with Soviniji first. Soviniji, you have been teaching in Spain for the past 13 years, where you're looking at students who are coming from Spain, Iraqi students who are performing the Shiva Tandav Stotra in Kolkata, teaching in Spain, and you have got Iraqi students coming back to Kolkata to perform, and you have got Bulgarian students also. That leads to a natural question, yes, but I would like to take off on a tangent from there. You're also working with the Maharashtra police, and you're working with Baikala jail, and you're looking at a smaller community there, who are got a much more focused area of their daily survival in that sense, hardly interested in a larger scope of Natya Shastra. So how do you look at these perspectives, and how does that make you stronger when you write?
Well, everybody has a story. You see that. Everyone has a story, and everyone has their perspectives. When I first went to work with Maharashtra police at the Baikala jail, the first time, there were almost 14 entrances. They locked and unlocked and locked and unlocked, and I didn't know, my vision of a prison, and such a hardcore prison at Baikala. The minimum crime is at least 3 murders. That's what we are dealing with. So I didn't know what to expect, and it came from my Hollywood films and some Bollywood films. But and I had to take off my earrings because I was told that they would press your earlobes and in 13 seconds they can kill you. So that's scary, and you had to take off your scarves and go in. But after 2 or 3 sessions, you felt we were on the same side of the table. They are like us who underwent very difficult circumstances, and in their circumstances also we would resort to murder. So that empathy happened, in a group of 36 criminals. Maybe 2 were psychotic and actual criminals. The rest behaved as we would in those circumstances. So again, exchange of art, transforming lives. Even my life is transformed each time I work with them, So is all about that flow of empathy, and that is the bigger love story, And Spain also, I have students, my centers, I only taught adults who came on their own money and own time. I did not want to deal with jaded NRI children who were pushed there by their parents, to go and learn heritage and would just stare out of the window. So I didn't deal with that. If children wanted to learn, I would send one of my students to teach them. So my Bulgarian student, Kristina Veselinova, is a performing Bharatanatyam dancer now. and she learned from scratch from me, and she also came to India after we interacted. Farah Daud, my Iraqi student, came to me at age 16, and she was recently in India to dance the Shiva Tandav Stotram for the Rotary International. So I feel that if we can connect as humans, and also your communication should be an art communication especially touches the heart, then nothing else is necessary. There are a lot of Spanish girls who learned from me who didn't even speak English properly, but they're still with me, and they learn online and they learn when I'm there, and most of them are performing artists now. So I think that is the bigger picture of love. That is also the bigger picture of magic and chaos that is India. That's all.
That's amazing. Dr. Alkaji, going on from there, in terms of curating and developing museums, and in terms of the literature, there's more than several books that you have focused on art, and the 14 books that you have focused on Indian heritage and culture. Which medium do you think is, I'm not asking which is more powerful, but which medium do you think is more integrative for the reader to be responsible after they reads a book, or for a visitor to a museum to take back the message of peace? And today with multimedia, with a lot of immersive experience that can be brought in and enforced, what is the scope? Where is the future? What are we looking at? Where something is going to be exciting enough to actually enforce maybe the concepts of peace, integration, understanding, equity, in that sense.
So I think it's all about emotions. And as Sohini just said and used this fabulous word, empathy. How do we connect? The main thing is the connect. And I think in that, in some ways, India is the leader. Because we are all about storytelling. We are a nation of storytellers. Whether you look at the epics, whether you look at Panchatantra, whether you look at the Itihasas, whether you look at the Purans, they all have beautiful stories. In fact, the Occidental world, or as we call it, the white Western world, when they look at our gods, and many of them, because of lack of knowledge, who don't understand, they can't think of a Ravan with 10 heads, or a Dashabhuja Durga, a Durga woman with 10 arms. And they write also much maligned monsters. It's not about monsters or demons or asuras. If you look at that, if you look at the mythic stories, whether it comes from Mexico, whether it comes from the First Nations in Canada, or it comes from Egypt, the stories are similar. The mother goddess is everywhere. Whether you look at any culture or any civilization, what do these stories tell us? These stories are about our inner transformations. When we look at the epics, they are not meant to tell that there was the Pushpak Viman, which was like a aeroplane going there. That's not the thing. It's all about emotions. There are border crossings. And when you look at the world, it's actually, I think it was Walt Whitman who said, I see the world in a grain of sand. So you look at the world in a microcosm, and the people are similar. The human emotions of love, anger, when you look at the Navarasas, for example, disgust, beauty, shringar, the human emotions are the same the world over. It's just how do we connect? And I think art, music, sound, the Nada Brahma, they have no language. It transcends everything. So it all depends, where are we going? And I think in these very troubled and challenging times the world over, everybody is looking for peace. And it's the desire. It's what you want. So if a nation is looking at peace, I don't want to make it very political here. We've got Israel, which is the eye of the storm just now. But what are we all looking at ultimately? We want a better world, a better future. And I think, because I belong to the world of arts and letters and writing, I think we need to transcend it through the language of love, which is the basic language of all mankind. So that's what it is.
But taking on at that point itself, ma'am, in terms of the museum, the futuristic museum experience, Government of Tamil Nadu now has a website where you can enter any temple in Tamil Nadu from your internet login.
Yeah.
So you can walk through those temples. So you are totally inside that temple while you are sitting in the house, and anybody in the world can do that. The museums that you are looking at and converging the knowledge, the extensive scope of knowledge that you have, can that be brought in future for people to understand the trauma, for example, of the Holocaust or the trauma of partition in that sense, and that we have gone through that path and tomorrow should be different?
I'm so glad you've mentioned the temples, because I personally believe within the Indian context, temples are our first museums. They were our first museums. Everything happened within the temple, whether it was the presiding deity of the temple, whether marriages which took place in the temple was actually a space of dialogue, of discussion, of the community. So our temples were our first museums, the first, as they call it, the wonder houses, the Germans call it that, or the ajaib ghars, the places where magic happened. So it was in the temple. And if you look at the immersive museums today, or the ateliers which are being done in France or anywhere in Europe, they are all immersive. Much as I love technology, I still feel the interaction that you have with the absolute object is the experience. Because when I stand in front of the Didar-i-Ganj Yakshi, what I feel when I look at that sculpture, it cannot be replicated through these immersive experiences, which are good, because they actually do communicate. They are all about communication, but it's not really about the aesthetic experience. You have to go to the space. So I think movement and travel also, because today the four of us here, we will always remember each other because we've had a discussion. We've sat in a place where we've talked. Had we a Zoom call, it would not be the same. So I rest my case.
Thank you very much. Toma, going on from that particular perspective, you have done your own experiment where your first book was about the village that was translocated, but your next book was a collection of short stories, but written by both Israeli Jews and Palestinian Arabs. And you brought them together to write short stories of what would happen in the future, not of what had happened earlier. And how would they look at the future and bring it together in a book is a big challenge by itself, even as a literary exercise. Why did you go through that path, and what happened with that?
Well, again,
And when can we get that book in English?
that book has not been translated. I will shortly say what this book. This book is, one of the things that were like political action and literature for me have to do with each other is on the realm of the imagination. Political action is not possible without being able to imagine something that does not exist. So in the Israeli-Palestinian context, one of the core issues for disagreement and for war between the two sides is the issue of return of Palestinian refugees to the place, to Palestine, which Palestinians see as their basic rights, and Israeli Jews often see as like something that is in danger of annihilating them totally. And in this very polemic ways of understanding the situation, it's very hard to make a step forward. So I initiated it in the context of an NGO that I was working for, a collection of short stories with contributions from Israeli Jews and from Palestinians living inside Israel and in the West Bank, where each of the contributors to the collection of short stories was asked to tell a short story in a political context after the Palestinian refugees have already returned, where there is no discussion about is it possible politically or not, or how should we do it, and so on, but just to put this as the basic context in which a story happens, and to ask people to tell a story in that certain context. Now, of course, because we're talking about short stories always have the inherent in a short story is a conflict. You can't have a short story without a conflict. So all these 12, 15 writers could not have written a story after the return of the refugees where everybody lives in happily ever after and everything is good, because that would not be a short story. So the conflict would still remain a part of these stories, but it tried to, with the power of political imagination, to make a leap and to say, okay, what would our world look like if we had overcome this obstacle between the two national communities?
Thank you. Jennifer, you have got such a diversity of perspectives here, but you are also a contemporary student and observer of bringing communities together. So how can we step out as a reader or as an author? How can we step out of our preconceived notions of what we should be doing or should not be doing? And certain books that would have impressed you during this journey, and did they actually succeed in getting communities working towards peace, or did not?
Thanks, I'll be quick so that there's time for questions. I think one of the first things that comes to my mind, which leads on very beautifully from what Tomer said in terms of challenging our own perspectives, is to read and attend experiences as diversely as possible. And one of the a method we use in our own work, but which I also have learned actually from other people using Holocaust education, in fact, is to learn from other experiences. And then, in fact, it's often much easier to reflect on your own situation and potentially conflict situations that you're in if you first think about them through the lens of a different conflict, a different culture, for example. So in the case of Holocaust education, I know of a fantastic program of people that I work with where they use Holocaust education to allow people in African states such as Rwanda to discuss their own conflict without yet directly talking about the genocide, which in many cases they are not yet ready to talk about. So it allows this bridge in the mind between your own situation and the other situation you're reading about. So I think just being very open to learning about new cultures and learning from other literature and reading widely, I think is the best thing. And the two sort of books that I love personally, one which I actually shared with Alka, Dr. Alka in the car, is Nonviolent Communication, which Tomer, I think that is one of the most a tool used a lot in the 90s, which did indeed fail because of the lack of political will. But I think on a personal level, the ability to reflect on your own needs and other people's needs before you go out into the community and act. I think, I always tell myself the only person you have control over is yourself. And so if you're going to start somewhere, I think that is something I would recommend. And also another book which may sound a little left field, but is The Art of Gathering by a woman named Priya Parker. She's an Indian American, and she talks about the intentionality of gathering. And so I think coming back to thinking of people's emotions, thinking of empathy, and intentionality is always to think about what you're actually trying to achieve and be able to connect with that. when you gather people. So rather than being an unemotional British person who is unable to say that actually what you want to meet about is peace, and then having a terrible meeting because that's not what you talk about. So she talks about that, and I think that's a fantastic place for us all to start as individuals working towards peace. Thank you.
Dr. Alka, you wanted to respond to that? No. Okay. I think we can allow for a question or two. Is there time? Yeah. Anybody? Please.
Yeah, so maybe this might be a little rude. If you have a gathering of dentists, right, they will probably feel that dentistry is the way to bring about peace. We have a great faith in the arts, right? But we have had the arts for 4,000 years, 5,000 years, and the world is still pretty much the same way, right? So my question is, when people don't have houses, they don't have food, there's inequity on the ground, if you don't address those questions, but we instead focus on representations of that inequity, is it still effective, or should we be trying different approaches entirely?
Dr. Alka.
Can I answer that? At the cost of being a bit reactive, I don't agree with you that we are in the same place at all. Not at all. We have grown in many ways and regressed in many ways. If you look at North Indian history, particularly the history of Magad, Patliputra, you see how evolved we were, and we had everything. Development brings its own challenges, and there's a lot which has been devalued. And if you say we don't have enough, if you look at what India was 70 years ago and where we are today, it's very different. And if you look at art, there too, I think, there is a great power. A lot is being done in that area, and a lot has been devalued too. Because of our own challenges, we ran after a lot of things from the Occidental world, and we devalued a lot which is ours. So we are in a state of Samudra Manthan. We are going, and we are also trying to jump into the Sheet Sagar and trying to get the best out for ourselves. So I'm so sorry, I really don't agree with what you said.
I would also like to say something when you talk about economics, that they need to earn enough, they need to have enough money for education, for food. I would like to mention Lord Jeremy Bentham, his welfare economics, where he says the larger good for a larger number of people. So there you're talking about happiness quotient, increasing productivity, increasing economic activity. And that happiness, that self-awareness, that consciousness comes from art. That's all.
Last question.
I partially agree to some things with the Maslow needs. Maslow made a pyramid where he said some basic needs have to be satisfied. But I think also that culture is the bridge further above to unify us, because what you said, the culture, especially here in India, has experienced all that, and I think India can be a leader, a guru for the rest of the world in this aspect. Don't you think that this experience which India has made over thousands of years can teach the whole world from the cultural aspects? Coming from a Western background, I can see it already how much we learned in Europe from India. For example, we have more Indian Sanskrit universities than India itself. And I think, do you think that India can be this guru for the rest of the world through culture?
Well, absolutely, but I think every country has a very rich culture if that is delved into. And I would also say what you're talking about today, a lot of it is obstructed by a lot of cultural racism which happens in the West. I'm sure Alka has faced that too. And though our classical arts are so old, when there's a forum for classical arts of the world, there would be a ballet or there would be an opera. Nobody would think of having a Bharatanatyam or a Kathak recital there if the Indian embassy is not involved. Instead, India and Africa would be marginalized to the folklores. So you would have folk dances full of colors, bursting with joy, and put into the exotica bracket. So that cultural racism has to be eroded out for a democratic reign of Indian arts first. And that kind of political pressure, that kind of where the big white boys decide ultimately, when that is dealt with, I'm sure the Indian arts will be taken as it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank my co-panelists. I am selfishly grateful for having been able to pick up on this particular opportunity of having interacted with Dr. Alka Pandey, Sohini Roy Chaudhary, Tomar Gardi and Jennifer Dunn. This sort of a magical opportunity would have been quite difficult to overlap with one another's time, but this has been made possible at PILF, and I thank the organizers for that, and I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with you in the future. Thank you.
Very much.